is approving the submission to the Auckland Regional Amenities Draft Funding Plan. So, councillors, this is the operative funding that they get. We are just at this stage approving the submission. So, over to you, Josie. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councillors. The report today details the Auckland Council submission on the Refere draft funding levy for 2015-2016. The Funding Board will consider Council submission along with any other submissions on the 3rd of March, and then this committee will then consider the final funding levy next month. Essentially, the draft funding levy proposes a total levy of $15,148,400. That's an increase of 5.85% over the 14-15 funding levy. However, a direct comparison is not possible because the 15-16 levy includes an extra $1 million in step-up funding for the trial of the annual Arts Festival. The Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust has not applied to the Funding Board. Consideration will be given through the LTP process. And Stardome have received a one-off grant of $150K in 14-15. The proposed funding levy for 15-16 has decreased that amount to Stardome by $100K. The Funding Board are also recommending, as part of their draft levy, a 3.57% increase in board remuneration for the directors and the chair, and an increase from 1.25 to 1.5 times director fee for the deputy chair. Councillors, we've not covered the remuneration increase in our council submission. However, if there is an issue that you would like to discuss, it would be appropriate to raise it through the submission process, through the council submission. The four main parts of the council submission, and that's on page 97 of your agenda, include acknowledgement of a modest increase in total funding. Again, expressing concern that some amenities show an increasing reliance on ratepayer funding, and we're asking the Funding Board to continue to work with those amenities to ensure they have a plan to achieve financial sustainability. We also note additional concern at the indicative funding requests from the amenities for the 16-17 levy, and we suggest that any significant increase would require a high degree of engagement between the amenities, the Funding Board and the Council, similar to the process that we undertook for the annualisation of the Arts Festival. Councillors, there's two recommendations in the report. One is requesting approval of the submission to the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Plan draft funding plan, and two, to request authorisation to you, Madam Chair, of this committee to sign the submission on behalf of Council. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Penrose.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Josie and Alistair. Just a query, if I'm reading right. So, and I read here on page 61 with the Auckland Festival Trust that they do want to review a request of council to 216. So they're looking for an additional $1 million?
Yes. If through Madam Chair, you may recall that last year, I think it was last year, some reports came to Finance and Performance Committee working through the business case to go from a festival every second year to trialling an annual festival. Council was advised at that time that would cost approximately an extra $1 million in council funding. And Council supported the annualisation of the Arts Festival on a trial basis in principle, and after that decision in principle was made, the Arts Festival made their funding application to the Funding Board seeking additional funding, and the Funding Board's assessment is that they do need, in fact, an extra $1 million to put on an annual festival.
It does concern me, Madam Chair, especially when we're having other cuts throughout the region. Okay, thanks, Alistair.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. And I mean, I do vividly remember us voting an extra $1 million towards having the a trial annualisation of the Arts Festival.
That's right.
So, and we will be reviewing that after they are consecutively occurring after 3 years. I just had a question about point 8, the $400,000 that we were compelled to give the board to fight or defend ourselves in the judicial review with the Westpac Helicopter Trust. That $400,000, can you just remind me where that came from? Did it come from legal services pot, or which pot did that come from?
I don't have the detail. I suspect it may have come out of...
The Refere pot, did it?
No, it may have come out of our department budget, in effect. But,
Okay, so
out of the total grants budget that we hold for there is a budget for the War Memorial Museum, MOTAT, and the Regional Amenities Funding grants, and I think it came from within that budget.
So it came from there, but I'm a bit concerned that with Westpac not applying to the funding body this time round, and the advice from the Mayor's office for them not to do that, that'll be, back in our pot and straight back out to them again. So it sounds like that goes into that Refere pot. It looks like now it's going to be open slather. Have you got anything to comment around that?
Any funding, the Rescue Helicopter Trust made the decision not to apply to the funding board for funding for the 15-16 financial year.
Yes.
As I understand it, there will be a request for funding for a capital contribution, and remember the regional amenities funding regime is for operating funding
I
only.
absolutely understand the parameters, but last year we had a
Yes, there will be...
jiggery-pokery around that anyway, so...
There will be an application for a capital contribution towards the purchase of the new helicopter, and that will be considered as part of the final LTP decisions. So that information will be before you, and the decisions will be made by the Budget Committee and ultimately the governing body.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. On page 97, just at the bottom, it mentions the indicative application amounts for 2016-17 would amount to 32.8%, 8% increase in funding to the amenities, but it doesn't give the base that 32.8% relates to.
I think that base is calculated off the
Last
provisional allocation that's in the 15-16 financial year.
So the 32.8% is the increase over the provisional amount. So can you point me to the provisional amount?
Page 44.
Just a comparison between the provisional and the indicative.
Is that page... Sorry, I don't have the...
71.
Page 71 of your agenda.
So that's 17,293,000.
Yes.
And
I
what's
think
so that's the indicative. What's the provisional then?
the provisional grant allocation is the what the funding board is proposing be the total levy for the upcoming 15-16 year, which is what we're making a submission on now.
And what amount is that? Because I'm just trying to arrive at the 32.8% increase.
That amount is actually $14,833,400. The total levy will be slightly greater than that because we also pay money towards the funding board for their administration costs, so there's an extra $315,000 on top of that, but we're just doing a comparison on the amenities fund.
So I understand that. So is the difference between those two figures 32.8%?
I'll have to trust Josie's mathematics on that.
Can
but
I just make the suggestion that you check that out? And if there is a change, make that change. And if I'm going to vote for this, I'd just acknowledge that if some change needs to be made to that figure, then it should happen.
I think, to be very clear, that the submission that we're making today is only for the 15-16 financial year. when the amenities make their annual funding applications to the funding board, they're asked to give an indication of what their funding requirements will be in the next 2 financial years. They have done that. I think the funding board, and I don't want to speak for them, although I do note that Vern Walsh is behind me wearing his a Refere hat today, not his Motat hat as he was earlier. I think the funding board has expressed some concern about the step up in funding that is indicated in those outer years, and we're proposing that our submission should also express concern about that, because it is a significant jump, although it is largely driven by just 1 or 2 amenities.
I'm not at odds with any of that. It's simply that there's a letter in here, there's a figure in here. I'm just questioning the accuracy of that figure and the necessity to get it right, because that's what people read.
We'll check our maths.
Thank you.
We'll check our maths,
Cool.
thank you.
Thank you. Member Taipari.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. At the moment, I find myself in a position where I'd have to oppose the submission on the basis that I think it lacks the promotion of Māori outcomes, the Auckland plan, outcomes for Māori, and responsiveness. And I say that because the Māori impact statement tells me nothing of how the submission can take into account those matters. Just gives me some general statements, and so it leaves me wanting for a lot of more questions. I accept that within the funding board report there are some initiatives and amenity activities associated with Māori that have been shown, but I mean, the extent to which those individual amenities deliver services or benefit to Māori can't be assessed based on the information provided in the funding board report, and the details on how that reaches out to Māori has to be identified within the annual report, when the annual reports are presented for the previous year, and then unfortunately in this one is they're unavailable to be taken into account. So I can't see why I would support the submission that hasn't supported Māori in regards to making these funding available for these amenities. So I'm open to any answers, Madam Chair, on how that might be corrected if I'm wrong, or corrected if I'm right.
I think the only comments I can really make is that the regional amenities themselves do not report directly to Auckland Council on their performance and their achievements and what they do. Although, that being said, each of the amenities will be coming in to this committee over the next couple of months in March and April, like the museums were this morning, to give you all an opportunity to ask them questions like that.
And yeah, as we heard from the museums this morning, they're doing quite a bit.
Yes. The Regional Amenities Funding Board itself, it is embedded into the legislation that one of the members appointed to that board must be there to represent the interests of Auckland Māori, and that board member is there, if you like, to press issues of Māori wellbeing with the amenities directly from the board's perspective. So we have also put in place funding principles. Auckland Council has added some funding principles that require the amenities and the funding board to have consideration to aligning their activities to the Auckland plan, and included within that are obviously Auckland Council and the wider community's contribution to Māori wellbeing. So there is an indirect relationship between Auckland Council and the actual amenities who are delivering these services, so the extent to which we can influence through this submission what they're delivering for Māori is fairly limited.
Okay. Thank you.
So can I just ask this question, Madam Chair? So does that mean we say nothing?
We can say whatever you like. If you would like to add something into the submission, and this council wants, this committee wants to include that, then we'll happily include it in the submission.
And the time frame I have for that?
No pressure, but
3
submissions close tomorrow, so.
Yeah, funny that.
Just,
So
I mean,
I've raised what I consider my
well, we
position.
can put
Madam
something
Chair.
into the
Thank
submission
you.
if that's what you want. Right, Councillor
Try my
Casey.
best.
I've got 2 questions, one about the Star Dome and one about WaterSafe Auckland. I'll start with Star Dome. I don't really understand why we have reduced the grant And I'd like to ask a question about the statement in here about admission prices. Did they reduce their prices at door, or did they increase them? Because it doesn't, I don't understand. Regional funding has enabled the organisation to align its visitor admission prices so it can compete more effectively in the visitor discretionary spend market. Does that mean they put them up or put them down?
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't have the detail about the admission prices. That's something we can raise with them when they come into this committee. I think they're here next month, but we can find out that information for you. In regard to their grant, in the 14-15 financial year, I think it's best to think of they got a base grant, and on top of that they got a one-off
$50,000.
$150,000 contribution. So that was a one-off. In nominal terms, their grant proposed for the 15-16 financial year is $100,000 less than what they received in the current financial year. But when you take out that $150,000 one-off grant they got, it's actually a $50,000 increase in what they got last year.
And so just back to my question, which was the funding board acknowledges that accessing funding from other sources to support the work of the organisation and funding for building, blah, 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 remains a constant challenge. So there's an acknowledgement of the difficulty because of the constraints of the site, and yet still we don't give them what they're asking for, which is patently what they need to not increase their door price.
That is an assessment that the funding board has to make on an annual basis. Perhaps a question better answered by.
Fern, do you want to come
I
up?
think that needs to happen because there's no, the submission's about the funding, and my other question is about funding as well. This is the only time I get to ask it, right? Hi, Vern.
Welcome, Fern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is probably more appropriate for the individual amenities to respond to the more operational questions related to their specific amenity. But in terms of Stardome, we did give them a one-off grant to enable them to do a strategic and operational review, because the board did have a view that they needed to refocus on where they are in the particular space. That has only just been completed, and there's still more work being done around some of the specifics of that, including work around how they can access other funding from outside the Auckland Council family to develop some of those strategic initiatives I've identified. So that's all around capital funding. Of course, we can't provide that, and trying to move the organisation forward. They apply to us, they determine what funding they will apply to us at. We do encourage organisations who are not quite at that sustainable level yet to be bold in terms of their application processes, and are assessed on that basis.
My second question relates to Water Safe Auckland. I sat on the bylaw hearing for the life jackets, and I see that the three organisations mostly concerned with water safety, in other words, surf life saving, and what's the other one?
Coast Guard.
The Coast Guard. They got exactly what they asked for, and yet Water Safe Auckland have had a reduction. Well, they haven't got what they asked for, and I wondered, when I read the three reports, I don't understand, because basically what you say about Water Safe Auckland is the same as you say to the Coast Guard. In other words, we think this is appropriate for the work that you do, and I'm saying, in light of the new bylaw and our expectations of education, would we not be making sure that all our water safety organisations get what they ask for?
Madam Chair, WaterSafe are going through a transition at the moment. They have a new chief executive. They have refreshed their governance board, and they're looking at locating to another position closer to the water, where they can promote their activities a bit better. We have for some years been concerned about the level of funding as a percentage of total revenue they get from Auckland Council. They have become very dependent, if you like, on council funding, and we are encouraging them, and they have undertaken a number of initiatives in the last few months to try and get revenue from other sources. But we're very encouraged with their new chief executive and their current board to drive that.
I just wanted to compliment them on the work they've been doing with the local boards, with their board.
Yep.
They do really good work across the region.
And they'll be coming in too, Kathy, in the next couple of months.
Sorry?
Councillor Cracks.